It's the 1920s. Europe is still reeling from the First World War. But across the Atlantic, America is enjoying its ascendance to global superpower. It's a time of frivolity and fun, and a time of rapid change.
Big corporations were forming, technology was on the rise, and we were changing from an earlier, simpler people to a much more complicated society. Edgar Cayce represents, as do great actors or poets, an individual who speaks out of the collective need of his time and place and culture.
Clients came to Cayce to inquire about everything under the sun. Oil prospectors came asking about the location of oil wells.
Some of the most remarkable readings before 1923 are oil readings, geophysical readings. Edgar Cayce gives almost a foot-by-foot breakdown of the geophysical conditions for a particular site. And invariably, he was right. He was dead on.
Great minds also met with the sleeping prophet.
Thomas Edison received readings on the nature of electricity. Woodrow Wilson, President of the United States, who was suffering from a heart condition. We know that George Gershwin received readings. We know that Nelson Rockefeller received readings.
Edgar Cayce was extraordinarily eclectic in his psychic work, but his predictions on world affairs with dates and vivid descriptions of events to come are a testament to his prophetic powers.
World affairs readings are absolutely scary.
It was like he was reading the headlines 4 years in advance, consistently.
He's under trance in 1925, asked by a client how the future of business will be, and he says, better pull your stocks out.
In the adverse forces that will come then in 1929, care should be taken, lest this be taken from the entity.
Cayce foresaw the onset of the Depression 4 years before it happened, and in 1931 he accurately predicted an end to the hard times that continued to plague the country.
In the spring of '33 will be the real definite improvements.
The only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
Now, of course, that's the New Deal, when we did slowly start to get out of the Depression.
Cayce also foresaw the next World War, long before anyone could have predicted it.
In 1935, Edgar Cayce was giving a reading to a 29-year-old freight agent, and the individual wanted to know about affairs of an international nature. Cayce predicted that there would be an alliance between the Austrians, the Germans, and the Japanese. He says in the reading, and unless there is interference from the divine, the whole world will be set on fire. In 1935, no one had any idea that any of this was about to happen.
With the League of Nations still in force, another war seemed implausible, and yet...
Edgar Cayce seems to have had a psychic sensitivity to the coming of World War II. There were certainly things in the news that were the clouds of this coming war, but he targeted the time in which it might begin to occur and even its end, and many of the dynamics that went on during those war years.
Cayce also foresaw social upheavals that would emerge long after his death in 1945.
Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice.
Edgar Cayce's accuracy with predictions is also suggested by his statements about how mob rule could potentially happen in the United States, particularly if there weren't some social changes.
Ye ought to have a division in thy own land, before ye have the second of the presidents that next will not live through his office. A mob rule.
In April 1945, Roosevelt died in office. Kennedy's assassination would follow in November 1963, as the civil rights movement raged on.
That one instance points to how important it is to see that Edgar Cayce was also a commentator on social affairs. He said that unless there would be a kind of leveling that would come in society, that there couldn't be one rule for those who were rich and privileged and a different rule for those that were the have-nots, that we were in for tremendous, difficult changes in our culture.
With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together.
Casey was not a Republican or a Democrat. He wasn't trying to advocate any particular political agenda, but he clearly had a moral sense about something that needed to be achieved if we were to fulfill our destiny as a nation.
Whether they dealt with civil strife, war, or medicine, Casey's visions would be lost to us today if it wasn't for Gladys Davis, a young stenographer Casey hired from 1923 on to record every word he uttered while in trance.
She was much more than a stenographer. She really completed the work. And it's because of Gladys Davis that we have the readings today.
I felt an instant attraction to this man. I just trusted him. One day during a reading, he said a string of words, so I was wondering whether I should put a dash or comma or just how to word this. And over there asleep on the couch, I mean, his eyes closed, he said, put a comma between these.
After she took the reading, she then typed it up into a copy that she would send to the person who had the reading. In the interest of confidentiality, all the names of the people having readings were removed and numbers were inserted.
It made no difference to Casey if his clients were paupers or powerful. He never charged for a reading, relying on donations instead, a decision that weighed heavily on the Casey family.
We struggled financially, yes, all the time. Our mother was frequently wondering what she was going to buy for groceries next week, because if he got 2 or 3 readings in a row and he had a little money, he'd buy a load of topsoil for the garden, or he'd buy a new fruit tree. I think my father gave these readings because he felt it helped people, and that's what he wanted to do.
Casey's greatest ambition was to open a hospital where his patients could receive treatments he prescribed in his medical readings. In 1925, he moved to Virginia Beach, where 3 years later, the hospital opened. It closed in 1931 in the midst of the Depression.
After the hospital had folded and, he'd lost everything, I heard him say that was probably the saddest time of his life.
But in good times and in bad, Casey never lost his prophetic touch. In fact, another set of readings had emerged in the 1920s, prophecies so astounding that they still echo today and may yet turn history on its head.